Hello everyone, today I thought we... What? Okay, let's try that again. Hello everyone, today I thought we'd head out and revisit the... What is going on? Hello everyone, today I thought... I thought we'd head out and explore... some of the new features of the Minecraft...
villages.
Huh? Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Minecraft The Journey with me, Bugman CX, and you guessed it, today we're going to head back out and see if we can find one of these Minecraft villages, because so far all of the ones that we've found have been ghost towns, and I've heard that in Beta 1.9 all of this has changed, and newly generated villages now contain a brand new inhabitant. So, let's head out and see what we can find. We've had to head off into new chunks for this one because these new village mobs will only spawn in new villages that are generated by the game. So I've head out here to try and find, and I think we've just found it, to try and find a new village. So let's head on in and see what we can see. Here we are, a brand new village, and as you can see, it's occupied by these guys. Now, we commonly know these as villages, but as you can see, they seem to be called something else. Testificates. But before we get too deep into all of this, let's recap on the whole idea of towns and villages in Minecraft and see how we got here. Villages and NPCs had always been planned for Minecraft since the early stages, where Notch had often discussed the idea publicly or on his blog. But what we have today is quite a bit different from the original plan. During the early development of Minecraft, Notch took a lot of inspiration from the community for ideas and feedback, and one of the biggest elements planned to be included originally came from user Mick Lee. Mick Lee had come up with the idea of Pigmen and created the original Pigman skin. He pitched the idea of Pigmen as a mob within the game to Notch many times. I started bugging Notch about Pigmen, and so that kept going and going and going. Ultimately, Notch caved into the idea and decided that Pigmen would probably be implemented. But why Pigmen? Where did the idea come from? Mick Lee said, "I don't know, I think it spawned from the idea of where Notch fouled up the creeper when trying to create a pig, and what happens if you take that to another level, and then you have a Pigman." Over the time that followed, Mick Lee created an entire lore for the Pigmen, but it was Exophobia who created all of the artwork for the skins. Exophobia spoke about this on Planet Minecraft. Mick Lee made the initial Pigman skin back before Minecraft InDev. Pretty much when pigs got added is when he made the Pigman skin. When he met me, he asked me for a tribal Pigman skin. I then gave him the one with the loincloth and face paint. So he started using that as his skin. Then he wanted to take it one step further to tribal Pigman chieftain. He attempted to make one of his own and it didn't go so well, so I made one and he loved it. Then he wanted a Halloween edition Pigman. The zombie Pigman was born on October the 18th, 2010. It was getting close to the end of October 2010 and Notch had decided to release the Minecraft Alpha 1.2 update to coincide with Halloween. This update included the new Nether dimension and a bunch of scary new mobs, including one that Notch described as kind of pointless. It would become clear which mob this was shortly after, when Notch tweeted Exophobia asking for permission to use the zombie Pigman skin. It was a few days before Exophobia replied, pointing out that Notch could use the original Pigman skin. Some discussion followed, but Notch decided to proceed with just the regular Pigman skin for now. When Alpha 1.2 was released, we found that the zombie Pigman had been introduced with a skin slightly modified from the original, and Pigmen were officially part of the game. Well, in zombie form at least. Alpha 1.2 also included the Pigman skin within the game's files, and although it was unused at this stage, it seemed as if it could have been added for future use. But the idea of Pigmen and villages would be put on hold for a little while yet. Meanwhile, Mick Lee continued to petition his idea about the Pigmen in the game. Mick Lee created his own bacon cape and tweeted it to Notch out of boredom. Notch saw this tweet and decided to award it to him as a personal cape. Mick Lee described this in an interview, and then one day Notch was on Twitter and I tweeted him the cape and the next thing I knew, I had it. Sadly, the personal bacon cape was removed shortly after when other players got jealous and started demanding their own personal capes. And this makes the bacon cape one of the rarest capes in Minecraft's history. By the time the adventure update came around, Notch was keen to add villagers, and by now it was certain that they'd be populated by pigmen. But as we can see, that's not what we ended up getting, as the developers decided to go down a different path for these NPCs. So as we can see, these village occupants are actually called Testificates, given the fact that they have the giant word Testificate floating above their heads just like a regular player. And interestingly, it's only in Minecraft Beta 1.9 pre-release where you'll see this word Testificate above their heads. In Beta 1.9 pre-release 2, coming up very shortly, that wording is removed and they're just rendered properly, a bit like this when you press the F1 key, no more Testificate above their heads. The name of Testificate is a reference to Dwarf Fortress, and Dwarf Fortress is one of the many games that inspired Notch to create Minecraft in the first place. But for now, these Testificates have a very basic implementation. They have no real behavior, you can't interact with them, and interestingly, they're currently implemented with the same AI as the pig, which I find quite ironic given the fact that these were almost implemented as pigmen. Oi, what are you doing out there? Well, while we're inside with these two Testificates, why don't we have a closer look at them and see what features they have? Interestingly, these two are quite easy to work with right now because they're just using the pig AI, and pigs can't open doors, so that's really convenient for me. They'll just stay stuck in this house forever. So let's have a little bit of a closer look. If we look at their faces more closely, turn around and look at me, please. You'll see that they have these giant honking noses on their faces. And they look a little bit human-like, I would say, sort of, except for the fact that they have also giant foreheads. So what was the inspiration for the look of the villagers? Well, again, Notch took his inspiration from other games that influenced him in the creation of Minecraft, and the look of the villagers was actually inspired by the shopkeepers in a game called Dungeon Master 2, a popular dungeon crawling game that was released in the mid-1990s. But I'll let you be the judge of that. What do you think? Some of the original ideas for interacting with villagers included going on quests. In a March 2011 interview, when asked about whether the game would include missions, Notch said, "I have this really silly idea of the mob villagers with a parody of MMO quests. A quest board, maybe with a picture of a pork chop and it says 4, right? So I have to go get 4 pork chops. I think that could work if you made it silly enough. You don't have to do it to progress, but if I do it, I get a diamond. Then you would get tiny mini-quests and you could get more favour with the town." On how villagers might appear in the game, Notch said, "The NPCs would definitely feel alien by design. They wouldn't feel like players. When you first see it, it would look like a town, but then you'd realise they're just walking around randomly. It'd be weird, creepy. Villagers, like in JRPGs who stand there and say only one line, except these would pathfind around randomly." When asked to give more detail on whether the villagers would live in houses or what sort of services they'd provide, Notch said, "I'd rather keep this secret for now, but I will say that you can choose to either help the villagers or destroy them if you wish." So as we've seen, interaction with villagers is definitely planned for, even if you can't do it in this version yet. But there was conflict between Notch and Jeb on the right way to do it. At PAX, Notch was asked if you'd be able to talk to NPCs, and he said, I would prefer it if you couldn't. Jens wants us to be able to." It wasn't clear how any kind of interaction with villagers would work yet. Speaking with villagers in your own language doesn't seem very Minecrafty. But users had some great suggestions for working around this. For example, Bootstrap Buckaroo suggested they could use pictographs instead of words, which actually kind of makes sense. As I've been wandering around the village, you might have noticed that some of the villagers are wearing different clothes. That's because each of the villagers have their own profession, and once trading gets implemented, they'll all have different types of trades. Each villager can be one of 5 professions. The farmer, who has brown robes, the librarian, who wears white robes, the priest wearing purple robes. We also have the blacksmith, who wears a black apron, and the butcher, who wears a white apron. These profession types match up to the different building types we can see strewn throughout the village. The spawning mechanics for this version don't seem to be well documented, but as far as I can tell, for each special building type that generates in your village, you'll get one of the corresponding villages. For example, if your village generates with a blacksmith, you'll get one blacksmith villager, and if it has a library, then you'll get one librarian, and so on. Any other villages that spawn in beyond that are all just farmers. I have found that the villagers spawning in with professions only works in single player. On multiplayer, all the villagers seem to be farmers. Why this is, who knows? Probably because the features are still being worked on. Now, speaking of textures, if we dig a little deeper here, we can find a couple of interesting things. Within the game's texture files, we find a green-robed villager, simply called villager.png. This is the default texture for any villager that has no profession, or perhaps one that has an invalid profession ID number. And that's just to make sure that there's a default texture to fall back on whenever the game might have to encounter this situation. But these villagers don't ever occur naturally, and the only time you'd ever see one is if you spawned it in using commands or mods. The librarian, the priest, and the green-robed villager texture files all contain an unused hood texture. Although this exists within the texture files, the villager model doesn't render it in-game. But this might have given an indication of what Notch and Jeb were considering for alternative appearances to the different professions. But maybe they decided against it, and that's why it still exists in the texture files but doesn't show up in-game. We can render these hooded variations using an external skin modeler, so here's what the librarian, the priest, and the regular villager could have looked like if their full texture was utilised. Now here's where it gets even more weird. If you go up one level inside of the game's texture files, you'll find another villager.png, but this one's a little more strange. I'm going to create a texture pack that retextures these villagers around me using this villager.png file, and, well, let's take a look. And here it is. I've replaced all of the individual profession texture files with this very peculiar looking Steve texture, and you might be thinking, well, they're just Steves, but let's go in and have a bit of a closer look, because as we can see, the villager model has an elongated head and robes, so this texture seems to have a decapitated Steve head, kind of attached by a little flap of skin on the side there. That's a little bit horrifying. And as you can see, there's still Testificates. And I imagine that this must have been some sort of mock-up texture when the Testificates were originally being tested internally, and this skin was never really perfected and just accidentally left within the game's files. But isn't it terrifying? I think it's time to get a little bit villager crazy. So I'm here in Amidst and I'm browsing my own world seed. Right here where you can see this player icon is where my player is currently located. This is where my ravine base is. And I want to look at the nearby villages to see if we can figure out where I can obtain one of each villager type. So I've been doing a little bit of previewing in the world seed. What I can tell you is that this village that's north of our ravine base is the very first village that we discovered that had no buildings in beta 1.8 pre-release. So this area is already off limits because it's already generated and there's nothing that we can do there. Down here, this is actually a very close by village and it happens to be in ungenerated chunks. As you can see, just here is where the stronghold is. This is the mini stronghold with just the staircase, so really not very far in between these things at all. This is only a few hundred blocks away from the ravine base, and this village happens to contain a butcher, a blacksmith, a priest, and a farmer, but no librarian. So I've been doing a little bit of another look around. Now, if I zoom out a little bit, you'll see that there isn't a lot of choice. Most of the other villages are now more like 1,000 blocks away from the ravine base. So I've been looking at these two over here. This one here in the desert happens to contain a librarian. Amongst other things, a blacksmith and mostly farmers. But, oh, and this village here, this is a weird one. This one doesn't exist, and this one doesn't exist. So the best option I think we've got is to take the librarian from this village here, put it on rails, and take it all the way to this village here, and then pick up all of the extras and bring them back to the ravine. This is going to take a while. We are at our first location and have a look how close it is. Just over there is the ravine portal. We're really not very far away at all when you look at it from the nether perspective, but let's light this thing up and head on through, and hopefully we should be just outside of the village. Fingers crossed. Okay, and it's nighttime. That's not good, but here we are. Hello, village. All right, we have ourselves the blacksmith, and inside of here, hopefully, there should be a blacksmith villager. Right around here, there it is, and there's the church. Okay, we're in good standing here. I just need to secure myself inside of here. I've brought myself a bed because I always forget about beds, but this time I planned ahead. So by the time we wake up, it should be daytime. Oh no, okay, plan B. We're getting ourselves ready out here. Most of the villagers are trapped inside of their respective buildings, so I'm not too worried about them. I did have to secure the blacksmith over there because that one was outdoors and wandering around. And we've got ourselves an arrow over here to remind me which direction to go to head back to the ravine base. And the way that we're going to move these villagers is minecarts and rail tracks. Oh, hello. Oh, just coming up for a bit of a look, are you? Well, you'll be coming along with me very soon, so you just wait there. Don't cause any trouble. So this arrow reminds us which way to go, and this is going to be the second stop because I do need to go out and get that librarian from wherever it is. We'll have to head out there in the nether and work all of that out. Bring that librarian down to this village and then secure all of them up and head on back to the ravine. Village number 2 with our librarian, and this one is at 1700 and minus 1000 basically, and that's around about 2000 blocks away from the other village, which is over there at minus 364. So what I've got to do is bust this guy out of the library, take it up into the air, and then just minecart it all the way along until we reach the other village. From there we can figure the rest out and get all of them over to the ravine base. Well, after an entire evening and an entire morning, well, maybe a bit longer because it's now well after lunchtime the next day since I started this, we finally moved this testificate all the way from one village to another, some nearly 1,000 blocks, probably over 1,000 blocks, and my tactic changed halfway through. What I did is I built this bridge as far out as I could and just kept extending it and extending it and extending it, and then I would just wait on the testificate's AI to kick in, wait for it to move forward a little bit like this, and then just remove the blocks behind it. And eventually it would inch its way forward. And I think that this process took a lot longer than it would have with a traditional minecart and rail system, but I only had limited supplies for that, and it was so tedious having to pick up the rails every time and losing them and dropping them down here, and it was just a nightmare. So I decided to go for this compromise really and try it out this way. And luckily, we're all here safe and sound, and we're going to organize the rest of the villages and get ourselves organized because the second part of this trip is not going to be like this at all. We're definitely going to be using rail because I have to transport a whole bunch of them. I've used up most of my iron supplies, but now we have a rail going over there and then all the way across there to the ravine base, and I think it's time for a test. So I've set up the rail here and hooked it up to this front door, and what we're going to do is place a minecart here, and then we're going to encourage one of these testificates to come out. Now these are just farmers. No, these are just farmers, so if we mess this up, it's not the end of the world. But if I place a minecart right there and encourage you to hop in. Oh, wait, why didn't you get in? Oh, tedious thing. Okay, there we go. Now, let's push it up and send it on its way. Okay, here we go. This is the bit that I'm a bit worried about because right down here is a drop. And it survived. It survived. All right, let's head down and put it into the corral. All right, you farmer, let's get you in here safe and... Fall damage. Fall damage. Look how excited they all are. They're all ready to move over to the ravine and live with me, and I'm excited for that. I can't tell you how many hours worth of work have gone into this to get us to this moment. Too many hours to count, I can assure you of that. And while it does look like we've got 4 farmers here, we do actually have one of each type. We're in multiplayer mode right now, and that means that they all look exactly the same. But we definitely have one of each remaining profession. We've already sent a farmer along ahead, so we have a butcher, we have a blacksmith, we have a priest, and a librarian. I just can't tell the difference between them right now, but we'll sort all of that out at the other end. All right, so what we're going to do is hop down to the end, push them along, and off we go! No! No, come back! There always has to be one. Come on. I never, ever want to do this again. That was an utterly exhausting exercise, but look, it has paid off because we now have one of each of the types of Testificates living in this cell right here. And yeah, I'll give them somewhere nicer to live in the future, but for right now, we need a little holding pen for them. Otherwise, they'll just escape and get out here and die. And that's the last thing we want after all that work that we put into capturing them. But now that we have got them here, that's going to be the end of today's episode because I need to go and have a little bit of a lie down. So thank you everybody for watching. Thank you again to my... Thank you again to my amazing patrons for supporting me. And check the links down in the description below if you want to join up on Patreon, join the Discord, or anything like that. Until then, this has been Bugman CX. You've been watching Minecraft The Journey. Bye-bye.